Recording in progress. Good morning, good morning, good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members.
Môre vis.
Môre Leon, hoe gaan dit vanmorgen?
Dit gaan goed, dankie.
All right, so today I'm going to be listening in and I will be sending my comments on the chat. I'm just busy with some matches here.
We refuse comments on chat, Comrade Reid.
Yeah, so I think the meeting will then be very quick.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We appreciate that, Honorable Reddy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Minister, you should never, when Honorable Reddy makes a proposal on having it on chat, you never should say no.
I'm pulling his leg.
Is Minister here? Is she here?
No,
Yes,
I'm
she's
talking
here.
about the Deputy Minister.
Oh, my deputy. Good morning, deputy. How are you?
I'm fine, my brother. How are you?
I'm very well, my brother. Great stuff. All right, all the best, guys.
Thank you.
Chairperson, you got my apology. I'm on the road for another project. I'll be departing early at a particular point.
Yeah, no, it's not a problem, Deputy Minister. I don't think we'll have a long discussion today. Have a good discussion, but I will make a proposal when we start the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Leadership. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Time for us to start our meeting. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. We've got our agenda flighted. Everybody is welcome at this meeting this morning. I believe we won't have that long a meeting. May I ask that we observe a moment of silent prayer or meditation? Thank you. Apologies. We know that the minister will have to leave early. Honorable Reddy is not going to participate. He will put his questions in chat, or if he participates, that'll be fine. Any other apologies?
No, Chairperson.
No other apologies. Colleagues, before we start the briefing by the department, I just want to ask that point 6, considering an adoption of the MOD, whether we maybe can postpone that with 14 days to give each and every party the opportunity to go back to their caucuses and discuss this before we take a decision on that. Can I find out whether there is any objections against that? Honorable Ditebe?
Agreed, Chairperson. Thank you very much. That will be in order.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, Honorable Moore?
No, as well, Chair, supported. I think we need the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, colleagues, so we will not consider point 6 today. We will add that to a meeting and where you will give feedback and just where we take a decision whether we adopt the MOD, motion of desirability. Colleagues, I'm going to ask the department now to do their presentation. I want to give the opportunity to the department. I don't really want them to rush half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, DG. I think it's very much important that everybody understands the briefing of the new service amendment bill, and so that we don't rush the department with their presentation, and then we can have a discussion on that. And colleagues, really, if we really need to come back on this bill and have a further discussion, we can add that in. It is very much important for us to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities when it comes to amending a bill and not rush that through. Minister, I'm handing over the session to you now.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning to you, Honorable Chair. Good morning to all honorable members of this portfolio committee. Good morning, DM Mahlobo and DM Sihlulo. Good morning, DG and the entire team of PWS. Good morning as well to our portfolio committee of Parliament in ensuring that they put this meeting together and link us correctly. Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, we appreciate the moment of tabling this bill, which is an amendment bill, which is not a new bill. We've been working in accordance to this bill. It is only when you implement where you find that there are certain gaps in a bill. So now we have lifted those. Hence, we are bringing this amendment bill. It has went through all necessary processes that are required for a bill to be tabled before you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, local government has executive authority, as we know, and that is in respect to the provision of water and sanitation services in terms of Section 156 of the Constitution. Therefore, the provision of water and sanitation services are a function over which municipalities has executive authority. Section 151, subsection 3, further states that a municipality has the right to govern on its own initiative the local government affairs of its community, subject to the national and provincial legislation. Section 154 of the very Constitution, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, puts an obligation on the national government to ensure that local government services meet minimum norms and standards and to provide support to municipalities for the delivery of water and sanitation services. And I wish us to underline that it to provide support, not to take over their function. Section 139 of this Constitution, Act 108 of 1996, further says, it must provide for national and provincial government intervention in local government when a municipality cannot fulfill one of its obligations. However, Section 139, Honorable Chair, which comes as an intervention, have generally not been effective in addressing services and failures and are limited in duration, and in the situation usually deteriorates again after the intervention. We have seen a lot of intervention that has been undertaken, which go through NCOP resolution. But after that intervention, municipality go back, there is something wrong that has to be attended to. Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, the reason for this is that the Constitution does not provide for permanent intervention, that is a takeover. of a municipality function. Water services are municipal functions in terms of Schedule 4 of the Constitution. When I was in Algeria, I asked them about how are they providing water versus the work of the local government. They said for 30 years, it was local government, but as the national government, they amended the constitution and they've taken that function because municipalities were unable to fulfill that obligation of providing water to their communities. Same applies with Egypt, because when we go to these trips, you also want to know how are they working with the other spheres of government. Honorable Chair and honorable members, as we have stated multiple times, the DWS is also not legally able to take over in terms of Section 63 of the Water Services Act, although the provision states that the minister can take over water services if municipality is failing. This is because the department does not have a budget to implement water services function. Maybe the chair and the committee will then say this department must have an extra amount of intervention only in terms of budget. There must be a ring-fenced function of budget from the treasury, not as part of our budget, but to say when you have to intervene, here is the money for intervention, because in whatever we do, whether we come through Section 63, we do that out of our allocated budget. And that allocated budget does not perceive, it does not try to say maybe in 2-3 years there might be an intervention that might be necessary. But because we are staying here in South Africa, we know all the pressures in local government, that in the local government in general had to be fixed. This is because the department does not have a budget to implement water services function. The reason why it is that we have a budget is because providing water services is not part of our legal mandate as the Department of Water and Sanitation. Therefore, for DWS to take over water services function, it would also have to take over billing of a municipality, revenue collection for water services in the municipality. In addition, it will have to take over the expenditure management functions, including supply chain management and recruitment. However, DWS does not have the legal authority or power to take over these functions in municipality. This would be contrary to the PFMA. In addition, Section 63 has to be implemented in conjunction with Section 139, which means that it can only be temporal solution. That provision of Section 63 is not just absolute, that you can just enter anyhow in municipality. It must have been processed to Section 139. The department's 2023 full blue drop and 2022 full green drop assessment identified 105 out of 144 water services authorities that are experiencing water service delivery issues. These municipalities are unable to discharge their constitutional responsibilities in a number of areas, including basic service delivery and the management of critical infrastructure like water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plant. At times, we hand over water treatment plant, water waste treatment plant, we hand over to municipality. A week after we have left, there's no water because they lack reticulation and provision thereof. The Water Services Bill is a crucial part of water sector reforms that are aimed at turning the sector around to improve the capacity of municipalities to provide the sector around to provide reliable water services as mandated by the Constitution. Honorable Chair, the main aims of this amendment of the Water Services Act are as follows: to address the non-separation of water service authorities as well as water service providers, because we have reported several times that there are certain municipalities who don't even have capacity, but they are both water service authority as well as a water service provider. They are a referee and a player at the same time. And these functions are in municipality by providing greater clarity regarding the functions of WSA, which is Water Service Authority, and the functions of WSP, because we have to differentiate who does what. That is the aim of this amendment bill, amongst others. To address the poor performance of water service providers by introducing a legal requirement that water service authorities may only appoint water service providers that have an operating license to be issued by DWS. That operating license must be issued by us. But at the current moment, those who are appointed as service providers by municipalities, they don't even have water license. That water license will require a minimum level of competency to those who register as water service providers. To enable the minister to legally require water service authorities to go through the public consultation process to choose the alternative license water service provider. Honorable Chair, as I conclude, when the existing water service provider does not make progress towards meeting the minimum conditions to obtain an operating license, to strengthen the ability of the national government to ensure that local government water services meet minimum norms and standards by introducing new offences and by enabling the minister to enforce compliance with obligations under Water Services Act by issuing directives and taking direct steps to rectify where there is persistent non-compliance. Honorable Chair, the amendments are also intended to strengthen the governance of the water boards and to align the Water Services Act with the provisions of PFMA and corporate governance provision. The Director General and the team will be able to take us through and the portfolio committee on the details and the pros and the cons of this amendment act. I thank you, Honorable Chair. I thank you, Honorable Members.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the DG now to continue?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning, honourable members. Good morning, Minister and Deputy Minister, and good morning, colleagues. The Minister has summarised the key constitutional issues well, so I won't dwell on that too much, but I will just add a bit of detail here and there and summarise. So, as the Minister indicated, the Constitution has various relevant clauses related to the provision of water services. In terms of 156 of the Constitution, read together with Part B of Schedule 4 of the Constitution, local government has executive authority over water services, which includes both water and sanitation services. But Section 155 also states, and the heading of the Schedule 4 states that those are the functions over which national and provincial government have concurrent legislative authority. And when you read that together with Section 115, which says that national government has the legislative authorities to see to the effective performance of municipalities of their functions in respect of matters listed in Schedule 4 and 5, by regulating the exercise by municipalities of their executive authority. It's in terms of that Section 155, read together with Part B of Schedule 4, that we have a Water Services Act. The Water Services Act is precisely that piece of legislation which national government has put in place in terms of Section 155 of the Constitution, to provide a legal framework to see to the effective performance of municipality of their functions in respect of matters listed in Schedule 4 and 5. So the Water Services Act provides a legal framework for how municipalities should implement their original executive authority related to water services. It doesn't mean that national government has the power to take over water services as indicated by the minister. It just means that we have the power to provide a legal framework for how the municipalities should implement their original function. And as the minister indicated, in addition to providing that guiding framework or regulatory framework for how the municipalities implement the function, Section 154 of the Constitution also puts an obligation on both national and provincial government to support municipalities in implementing their functions. And then the final part of the jigsaw puzzle of the Constitution is the issue of intervention. And as indicated by the minister, Section 139 provides for national provincial government to intervene in local government when a municipality cannot or does not fulfill one of its obligations. But of course, this Section 139 needs to be read in conjunction with the other sections of the Constitution, particularly Section 156 and 155, which says that these functions in Part B of Schedule 4 are original local government responsibilities over which they have executive authority. So intervention, read together with that, means that intervention can't mean permanently taking over, because if you were to permanently take over the function, you would be violating Section 156, which says they have the original executive authority. So for that reason, since the dawn of democracy, when Section 139 interventions have been undertaken by national provincial governments, they've always been temporary in nature. It's because of the way the Constitution is structured, and because the Constitution doesn't allow for a permanent 139 takeover under the guise of being an intervention in local government. And 151 further reiterates, as indicated by the minister, that a municipality has the right to govern on its own initiative the local government affairs of its community, subject to the national provincial legislation, which further emphasizes the points that the minister and I have been making. This slide just clarifies the difference between the National Water Act and the Water Services Act, which is the subject of the meeting today. The Water Services Act, as we've indicated, provides the Section 155 legislative framework to guide municipalities how to implement the function. In that regard, it covers all aspects of the water services function, including both bulk water services and distribution water services. The Water Services Act, as it's currently written, goes further to say that the national minister can put in place water boards to assist municipalities to implement their bulk water services function. That bulk water services function is still a water services function. It's still, in terms of the Constitution, a municipal function over which they have executive authority. And that explains why it's not compulsory for municipalities to use the water boards. For a municipality to use a water board, the municipality has to appoint the water board as a water service provider and has to contract with the water board through a performance agreement. And all the municipalities which are using the services of water boards have done that. But it's not compulsory for municipalities to use water boards. The original bulk water provision function lies with them in terms of the Constitution, and that explains why some municipalities have built their own dams and have other sources of water, and some municipalities don't use the services of water boards at all. That's a decision at the discretion of the municipalities. But for many municipalities, it makes sense to use the services of water boards because it would be very expensive for individual municipalities to develop all the bulk water infrastructure, water services infrastructure that the water boards have. So, for example, in Gauteng, we have Rand Water, which is providing bulk water services to all the municipalities, and it would be hugely expensive for each of the municipalities in Gauteng to develop their own bulk water services, much more expensive than we achieve with the economies of scale of having Rand Water to provide that service to a number of municipalities. Then you have the National Water Act, and the National Water Act provides a legal framework for the National Department to implement the national government's constitutional responsibilities to protect water resources. That's the main function of the National Water Act. There's nothing in the National Water Act which says it's only the National Department can build large dams, for example. Anyone in South Africa can build a dam, including the National Department, but many private sector bodies build dams, farmers, miners build dams, and some municipalities also build dams. Anyone can build a dam. If the dam is larger than a certain size and larger than a certain safety risk, then they have to get a dam construction license from DWS. And the other key part of the functions prescribed by the National Water Act is the allocation of water resources. We're a water-scarce country. If we're not careful, the demand for water will exceed the supply of water, so we have to very carefully allocate water use to different demands in the country, and that's another function of the National Water Act. So this slide just captures much of what we've said based on all of those constitutional provisions and taking into account the National Water Act and the Water Services Act. So it shows on the bottom left that both the bulk water services supply function provided by the water boards and the water treatment distribution and wastewater treatment functions, wastewater management functions, are local government functions in terms of Section 4 of the Constitution, with water boards providing a service to municipalities in that regard. And that's governed by the Water Services Act. And the National Department is responsible for those national functions, but also importantly in terms of the Constitution provisions that we mentioned, it's also national government responsibility to regulate and support water services authorities. And those are the constitutional responsibilities that we talked about to provide this Act, the Water Services Act, to provide an enabling legal framework for how the municipality should implement the function, to provide for regulation. So, for example, the norms and standards that we issue for municipal water and standards are issued under the Water Services Act. That's part of regulating water services authorities. And then we provide an enormous amount of support to Water Services Authority. And those are all parts of our key functions in terms of the Water Services Act to support water services by municipalities. Now, as indicated by the Minister, the existing Act, a fundamental part of the existing Act is that it differentiates between water services authorities and water service providers. And the existing Act, as it is, before we even amend it, it states clearly that the key role of the Water Services Authority is to ensure that water service providers contracted by them provide adequate water services. And the water service provider's responsibility is to provide the service. So it has this very important differentiation between what you can call a local regulatory function of the Water Services Authority, whose job it is to ensure that the service is provided according to standard. And then you have the other function, which is a body which actually delivers the service, and that's the water service provider. And in terms of the Constitution, saying Section 4, saying it's a local government responsibility, read together with local government legislation, including particularly the Municipal Structures Act. The Minister of COGTA assigned the WSA function to 144 of the 250 or 60 odd municipalities in South Africa. The reason for that is because it's the Minister, in terms of the Structures Act, it's the Minister of COGTA's responsibility where there are two subspheres of local government, and that is district municipalities and local municipalities. The Minister of COGTA has to decide which of those subspheres. The district or the local gets the function. So the reason why we only have 144 water services authorities, while we have many more municipalities altogether, is because in many instances the district municipality has been given the water services authority function rather than local municipalities. And in those instances, the local municipalities don't have the WSA function. It rests with the district municipality. And the existing, both the Water Services Act provide more guidance very explicitly in the existing forms. Both the Water Services Act and the Municipal Services Act spell out, in addition to the role of the WSP as providing the service, they say the WSP can be any legal body. It doesn't have to be an internal department in the municipality. It can be an internal department in the municipality, but it can also be a municipal entity. And an example of that is Joburg Water, which is the water service provider in Johannesburg. It can be a private company, and an example of that is Silula Manzi, which is the concessionaire in Bombela municipality and Ilembe municipality. Or it can be a water board. And both acts are explicit to say that a water service provider can also be a water board. And an example of that is the special purpose vehicle that Rand Water is setting up together with Mfuleni, which will then be a water service provider as well for the Mfuleni municipality, which will remain the Water Services Authority. Having summarized the broad constitutional and legal context, Chairperson, the next issue to look at is what is the key mischief that the Water Services Amendment Bill is trying to address? What exactly is the deficiency with the current draft or the current version of the Water Services Act that we want to address through the amendment bill? And I think the Minister summarized this, but to add a bit more detail, we have very strong evidence that water services have been declining in South Africa. Our 2022 and 2023 blue, green, and no drop reports showed that there had been a very worrying substantial decline across a range of performance indicators since the last time the drop reports were done in 2013 and 2014. We are currently doing further drop assessments. The green drop assessments are complete. We're busy writing up the reports with the service providers, and during next year, we'll be issuing new blue, green, and no drop reports. But these blue, green, and no drop reports are so detailed and provide and cover such a wide range of areas that it was possible for us to analyze them and identify the causes of the problems. So, for example, we found a very high correlation between poor blue drop reports in terms of water quality on the one hand and municipalities not having the required numbers of staff with the correct qualifications. The worst performing municipalities in terms of blue drop results had the highest shortage of skilled people with the right qualifications. And on the other hand, the best performing municipalities had performed best in terms of having the required right people in number of people with the right qualifications in positions such as process controllers, scientists, and other managers at water treatment works. So on the basis of that, we've been able to identify what are the causes of this deterioration. And they're listed here in the middle of this slide. In some cases, it's due to poor political and administrative leadership. It's due to municipalities not hiring the right staff with the right qualifications. And related to that, non-adherence by municipalities to standard operating processes for drinking water treatment and wastewater treatment. And then there's some fundamental financial challenges which also underlie the deterioration. So our whole fiscal model in the country is based on the idea that water is a trading services. Water services must be funded from revenue from the sale of water. In fact, the whole water value chain must be funded from revenue from the sale of water, apart from special grants like the MIG grant, WISIT grant, and there are big grants which go to municipalities to address infrastructure backlogs. and the portion of the equitable share which municipalities are supposed to use for providing free basic water to the indigent. So that's the way our fiscal model of the country is designed. If we were to change that and to say that water is no longer going to be funded from revenue from the sale of water, it would have huge implications for the fiscus. A huge amount of money would be required if water was to be free for everyone and it was to be funded from tax. And it would require a big increase in tax, either a big increase in tax or a huge increase in government borrowing, both of which are not feasible. So if we accept that fundamentally water must be financially self-sustaining, then you can see immediately that we have two major problems. The first is that the No-Drop report showed that municipalities have non-revenue water of almost 50% on average across all the municipalities, which means that the municipalities have to either buy water from water boards or produce the water themselves at cost. But then they only get revenue on half of that water that they paid for. So they're most likely going to be running the function at a loss. Over and above that, because there's no legal requirement for ring fencing of revenue from the sale of water for the water function, many municipalities vote for a portion of the little revenue that they do get to be used for other functions. And this has led us into a situation where many municipalities are on a downward spiral. And that downward spiral consists of high non-revenue water, leading to not enough money to do maintenance and to do repairs, and part of that little money being allocated to other functions. And the lack of money to do maintenance and repairs results in increasing leaks, increasing deterioration of the infrastructure, which then results again in increasing non-revenue water. So we're spiraling downwards because of this fundamental financial challenges that the sector faces. And that downward spiral is also, as we know, having a major effect on the whole water value chain, including the water boards, and has resulted in increasing debt to the water boards. So even though the existing Water Services Act separates the WSA and WSP functions, it doesn't go far enough in very clearly specifying exactly what are the WSA functions and what are WSP functions. And since the Act was passed in 1997, almost all municipalities have grossly neglected their WSA function. Almost all municipalities, almost all WSAs have opted for an internal service delivery mechanism, to use the language in the Municipal Systems Act, to perform the role of the water service provider internally using their internal water and sanitation department. But in terms of the existing Act, they are supposed to manage and account separately for the WSA and WSP functions, but hardly any municipalities are doing that. And according to the existing Act, Section 19 of the existing Act, the WSA is supposed to enter into a contract with the WSP, which specifies the service levels which are to be provided by the WSP, and provides for monitoring of the attainment of those service levels by the WSA. There's hardly a single WSA in the country which has entered into a contract with its WSP. Consequently, in almost all municipalities, the WSA function effectively doesn't exist, and the municipalities as WSAs are not providing doing their legislated function of ensuring that their appointed WSPs are providing water and sanitation services that meet minimum norms and standards. So this slide shows the current situation in most water services authorities. You have a water and sanitation department in the municipality, which is a technical department. The head of that technical department does not have control over recruitment, which is controlled elsewhere in the municipality, does not have control over supply chain management, also elsewhere in the municipality, normally under the CFO, does not have control over customer relationship function, usually managed somewhere else, and does not have control over billing and revenue collection. And that water services department gets a budget every year, which in most municipalities has no direct relationship to the amount of revenue collected from the sale of water, which means that the head of the Water and Sanitation Department in the municipality has no incentive to manage the department in such a way as to optimize revenue. So, for example, one of the things that the head of the Water and Sanitation Department could do is to make sure that all the meters that provide water to customers are working properly, so that the water can be properly billed and all the water that's provided can be billed for. But if the Water and Sanitation Department gets a budget which is unrelated to the revenue collected, they have no incentive to prioritize making sure that those meters work, because they'll get their budget anyway, regardless of the amount of revenue that's actually collected. And the big anomaly here is the contradiction between this model and the fact that our fiscal system in the country says that water services must be financially self-sustaining. If you were to look at a business in this regard, I don't think any business person would agree to run a business in this way and to be held responsible for making it financially sustainable and run in a financially self-sustainable way. If you have to run a business in which you have no control over your revenue collection, you have no control over key functions like supply chain, recruitment, etc. So there's consensus amongst ourselves as DWS and other key national departments, including National Treasury and the Presidency and the Operational Volunteer team in the Treasury, that we need to move the sector, particularly at water service level, towards a utility model. And in fact, we are moving the whole sector towards a utility model with the changes with the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency as well, and the water boards are also already effectively utilities. So we need to move to a situation which was actually what was envisaged in the original Water Services Act, where the Water Services Authority provides an oversight and governance role. It's a local regulator role. And the water service provider has full responsibility for all the functions, key functions that are required to deliver the service, including the customer relationship, billing and revenue collection, or at least a direct link between the amount of revenue collected and the amount of money available to the water service provider, and other key functions such as recruitment and supply chain management. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're saying that the water service provider must be an external service delivery mechanism. The water service provider can also, a utility water service provider can also be an internal service delivery mechanism. And since National Treasury has been implementing the reform of Metropolitan Trading Services program, some of the metropolitan municipalities have decided to move towards a utility model, but keep it as an internal service delivery mechanism. And the City of Cape Town is a good example. So their water service provider is their Water and Sanitation Department, and they have ring-fenced all these functions. So the head of the Water and Sanitation in the City of Cape Town now has control over all of these functions, and there's a very direct relationship between the budget that that department gets every year and the revenue collected from the sale of water. Turning now to another key weakness that the amendments are aiming to address, and that is that, as indicated by the Minister, the interventions to date have tended not to be effective. And I think we've covered the limitations of Section 139 interventions, and that they've tended to, and that they've all been temporary in nature. And Makana in the Eastern Cape is a very good example of this with regard to water and sanitation services. We know that there's been numerous Section 139 interventions in Makana, where an administrator has been appointed for a 6-month period. The powers of the council, of the elected council, have been suspended and handed over to the administrator for a 6-month period. Some of those administrators have been able to improve the performance of water and sanitation to some extent. But then, because of the Constitution, it's not permanent. And because of the Constitution, the powers are given back to the council after the 6-month administration. And in Makana, as a good example, things have deteriorated every time again with regard to water and sanitation services after the powers have been given back to the council. And the Minister also covered how, in terms of the Constitution, we can't permanently take over the delivery of water services where they are failing, despite Section 63 of the Water Services Act having that phrase to say that the Minister can take over the function from a municipality. That is one of the key parts that the amendment bill is going to amend, that Section 63 of the existing Water Services Act. We haven't yet been challenged on it by a municipality because we haven't yet attempted to permanently take over, as Section 63 says. But it's quite likely that if Section 63 in the current version of the Act were to be challenged and taken to the Constitutional Court, it would be found to be unconstitutional if it's interpreted as meaning that we can permanently take over a water and sanitation function in a municipality. And as indicated by the Minister, it's also impractical because we don't have a budget if we to take over a water and sanitation service in a municipality, we would have to fund the maintenance and operation. And we don't have a budget to do that. It's supposed to be funded from revenue from the sale of water. And to get that revenue from the sale of water, we would have to take over the CFO's office, to take over the billing and revenue collection function, which would be contrary to the MFMA. So we haven't tried to permanently take over a water and sanitation function in terms of the existing Section 63 for these reasons, for the fact that it's legally dubious as to whether we can do that, and also because it's impractical. So the way we have used Section 63 up to date is that, as per the existing Act, we've always done it in conjunction with 139 interventions. And our focus has been on very strong support to the municipalities. It hasn't actually involved taking over with any of our Section 63 interventions. Then to turn to the other part of the Constitution, which says we have an obligation to provide support to municipalities. And as we've indicated several times previously to the Portfolio Committee, between ourselves, National Treasury, COGTA, the Department of Human Settlements, a huge amount of support is being provided to municipalities. If you add up all the financial grants given to municipalities, including the equitable share allocation that municipalities are supposed to use for providing free basic water to the indigent, it adds up to more than 60 billion a year, which is transferred from national government to municipalities to support them to do the water and sanitation function. And then there's many other types of support as well, including training. MISA has over 100 engineers appointed full-time assisting municipalities. But despite all of this support, which has been in place for a long time, the Blue, Green and No Drop reports have shown that the services have declined. Why is that? Our analysis is that there are limitations to which support on its own can address the problem. Support is important and should continue, but support on its own is limited in being able to address the problem for the following reasons. Firstly is that support can't go as far as taking over, and the municipality remains in charge. So if a MISA engineer gives advice to allocated to support a municipality, gives advice to the municipality, but the leadership of the municipality refuses to listen to the advice of the MISA engineer, then it's not going to be effective. Also, if a municipality refuses to fill vacant process controller posts with people with the right qualifications, we can't run those recruitment processes on behalf of the municipality. And if the municipality decides to allocate revenue from the sale of water to other functions, that's a power of council to make those decisions, and we can't stop that. So there are intrinsic limitations to which support on its own can address the problem. So in that context, what are the key amendments that we put in the Act to address these issues? The first is that the Act goes much further, the amendments to that go much further than the existing Acts in terms of spelling out what are the functions of water service providers in particular, and making it very clear that all the key functions related to providing the service or water service provider functions, including the related supply chain management, recruitment, and billing and revenue collection. The second thing which the Minister mentioned is that it introduces a new measure for us to ensure as DWS, as the national government, that services are met, that services are delivered according to standards. And this is done with those provisions of the Constitution that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation in mind, because it's clear from the Constitution that one of our responsibilities is to provide a framework or measures to ensure that minimum norms and standards are met as municipalities implement the executive function. So one of the ways that we can do that is to ensure that water service providers have a minimum level of competency. And to achieve that objective, the amendment bill introduces a legal requirement that water services authorities can only appoint water service providers which have an operating license, which is issued by the Department of Water and Sanitation. And in addition to that, it goes further to say that as a last resort, if a water services authority fails to respond to notices and directives to get their water service provider to improve so that they can get an operating license, the Minister can require the water services authority to go through a Section 78 consultation process in terms of the water services, in terms of the Municipal Systems Act, to appoint an alternative water service provider which does have a license. Now, I must stress here that it's not the Minister who would appoint a water service provider. The Minister would require the WSA to choose a licensed water service provider. The appointment of the water service provider must remain with the WSA because the original function, the executive function, lies with the municipality. And then also importantly, the amendments include, as mentioned by the Minister, clauses related to strengthening the governance of the water boards. This slide just summarizes the amendments as I've outlined them. Now, to unpack the thinking behind the operating license system a little bit more. The best way to think of it is to think of it as something similar to a driving license that you have to get before you can drive a vehicle on the roads. This will be like a driving license for water service providers. It won't be comprehensive, just like when you go for a driving license test, it just tests your eyesight and that you have at least 90% of the road signs. It doesn't test every conceivable thing that you can think of in order to be able to drive extremely well. It basically just gives assurance that someone who's got a driving license has a basic level of competency to be on the roads. Similarly, the idea of this operating license system for water service providers is to give us and the country assurance that any water service provider has a basic level of competency to carry out the function. Now, it's also very important to note that we are keeping Section 19 of the Water Services Act, which is the clause I mentioned earlier, which says that a water service provider, a water services authority must enter into a performance contract with the water service provider. That remains. So the job of monitoring the performance on a daily basis of the WSP remains with the municipality, with the Water Services Authority, and it must be done through the performance contract between the WSA and the WSP. This operating license doesn't replace or doesn't do any of the tasks related to the ongoing performance management of the WSP by the WSA. Now, the Act says that the amendment bill says that the Minister should put in place this operating license system, and it says that the details of the operating license system must be provided for in regulations which will be issued after this amendment bill is passed. When we issue those regulations for the operating license system, if the amendment bill is passed, we will then also have to go through a public consultation on the regulations for the operating license system. But in the meantime, our thinking is that we need to make sure that this operating license system doesn't result in an arduous additional bureaucratic load on municipalities. So in that regard, the licensing requirements will be kept to a minimum and the system will be simple as possible, just like the driving license is requirements are kept to a minimum and are as simple as possible. And in addition, it will be based on available information, such as the results of blue, green, and no-drop assessments, MUSA assessments, information already provided by municipalities to COGTA and National Treasury, to keep the reporting burden on municipalities to a minimum. In addition, the whole point is to assist water services authorities to do their job better. This is all about strengthening the role of water services authorities in municipalities. So, the whole aim is to improve the performance of the water service providers. So all the existing water service providers, once the operating license system comes into effect, will be immediately given an interim license so that they can be legal. And they will then be expected to, over a period of time, to apply for and to meet the requirements to get a full operating license. They will be supported to improve, to be able to meet the conditions to get a full operating license. It's only as a last resort, if a municipality fails or if a water service provider fails to improve to meet those minimum requirements to get a license, that the minister might take the last resort step of requesting the Water Services Authority to appoint an alternative licensed water service provider. So, and that last step of legally requiring a Water Services Authority to appoint an alternative licensed water service provider will have to be exercised very judiciously. We can't, the minister can't require a Water Services Authority to appoint an alternative licensed water service provider if there aren't alternative licensed water service providers available. So when the regulations are issued, we will engage with society broadly and encourage any legal body, be it NGOs, be it private companies, be it water boards, municipal entities, any legal body which is interested in becoming a licensed water service provider to apply, so that with the aim of creating a database of licensed water service providers that can be drawn on by water services authorities in future. And in addition, it would be much better if water services authorities decide on their own initiative to appoint an alternative licensed WSP if their existing WSP is not performing, rather than be forced to do so by the minister. And in that regard, we're working together with SALGA and COGTA to put in place support mechanisms to water services authorities to engage with this issue of looking at alternative water service providers. So we're putting together packages of information, including, for example, good quality contracts that they could use to enter into concessions, lessons learned from the experience of municipal entities, so that when water services authorities go through the public consultation process to consider an alternative WSP, they do it in a very well-informed way. So whether a WSP is an external WSP or an internal department of a municipality, they will require an operating license. Chairperson, I've now come to the end of the part of the presentation which gives an overall view of the background to the amendment bill, the mischief that the amendment bill is aimed to address, and the key components of the amendments at a high level. And I'll now like to hand over to Annette to take us through the specific amendments. Annette?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, members, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, and colleagues. The current Water Services Act has about 82 provisions. We are amending about 20 of those provisions to enable the amendments DG has referred to. And then there's about 20 new inserts that we'll go into in detail. So the first thing that we would like to do is to amend provisions of the national standards. It is to be able to allow us to prescribe national standards for process controllers, as well as regulating the quality and management of potable drinking water. That has been a gap in the Water Services Act that we've tried to, we've been able to regulate with the Water Act for the wastewater, but there has been a noticeable gap in us being able to regulate drinking water. In addition, we also want to amend Section 10, which aims to introduce regulatory requirements for obligations to comply with the norms and standards for setting tariffs and charges for specifically our water services authorities as well, and to have these submitted by water services institutions for review to the minister. To strengthen also the regulations, the provisions under Section 9 and 10, these will now be deemed offences under Section 82 as well. So any non-compliance or non-adherence to the standards prescribed under 9 and 10 will be deemed offences. In terms of the licensing system, these are new additions indicated by the A, B, C, and D. It's a new licensing system, as DG has explained, and makes it compulsory when a WSA appoints a WSP, they must be licensed as that municipal service delivery mechanism. And it provides and enables us to have a licensing authority to be able to issue these licenses, and also to make sure that there's compliance and enforcement of the licensing. Section 22C sets out the procedures and requirements for any person, and DG covered who that person could be, who intends to apply for a license to operate as a municipal service delivery mechanism. And Section 22D sets out the obligations so that we are not delaying the process, that we must issue this license within 60 days if the prescribed minimum score has been met. So it's very binary, it's not subjective. It has been met for the category of license and must give a reason for the decision. The license must include the class and condition of the license, how we will review such a license, the reporting required, the right of the licensing authority to monitor and enforce license conditions, and to publish information of the licensee. To enable us to have performance mechanisms for the WSA to be strengthened, we are amending Section 19. Currently, the Act allows for contracts for external WSPs. We are also now making it compulsory where it's an internal mechanism as well. We want to provide compulsory provisions in the contract entered into the WSA and WSP, and this will relate to technical, financial, and governance requirements of the WSP. Where this is undertaken by the authority itself, the internal mechanism, this is provided currently under Section 20, but it only requires separate accounting. The amendment will now further require the WSA to regulate and set performance requirements and undertake the performance management of the internal municipal service delivery mechanism in terms of a performance management contract with senior management of the water services provider and in compliance with the contract regulations issued in terms of Section 90, like they would have to do for the external mechanism as well. Section 22, no person may operate as a WSP without the approval of the WSA. This is an existing provision. The approval must be for a limited period. This is not the licensing that we're talking about. It's the contract between the WSA and WSP, and may be granted subject to conditions that require progressive, efficient, and sustainable improvement in water services. And in terms of the amendment, must take into account the financial and environmental sustainability of the water service provider, must comply to Part 2 of Chapter 8 of the Municipal Systems Act, comply with Section 19 of the Water Services Act that refers to contracting, and the provisions mentioned above, as well as require with compliance to the licensing system. With any licensing mechanism, there has to be compliance and enforcement mechanisms as well. So Section 22E empowers the licensing authority, and the licensing authority is defined in the definitions to direct the licensee to correct any non-compliance with the license conditions, And 22F empowers the licensing authorities to suspend or to revoke a license provided that it follows due process in giving notification to the licensee, WSA, COCTA, and the treasuries. The WSA is obliged to make interim arrangements should that license be revoked to ensure that there's continuity of provisions and to appoint a new licensed WSP when revoked following the Section 78 processes under the Systems Act. Right, the next insert deals with water board governance or improving the operations of our water boards. So these are new Section 35A to J, and it's based on the learning from the past 26 years that we needed to provide amendments to Chapter 6. The water boards seek to strengthen the water board establishments. We want to improve the power and functions of or clarify the power and functions of the board. We need to align to the King Report in terms of the composition and appointment of the board. The section also now provides for the chairperson and deputy chairperson designation, the terms of office, which may not exceed 4 years or 2 terms, the removal or disqualification of a board member, the filling of vacancies in the board, concluding a shareholder compact with the minister, and establishment of committees, for instance, the risk, social, ethics, and audit committees. We need to strengthen, or the provisions aim to strengthen the governance of the water boards, including fiduciary duties of the water board members in accordance with the Companies Act, as well as stipulating the meeting requirements of the board. Importantly, we need to align the Water Services Act with the Public Finance Management Act, Section 43, with the funding and financial matters of the board. This includes sourcing of funding, income derived from the execution of their functions, water charges, loans raised in terms of the PFMA, grant funding when DWS appoints them as an implementing agent, or where they are appointed as WSPs by the Water Services Authority. Changes also to align for the reporting challenges that we've experienced. We are now aligning their financial year to start from 1 April to 31st March instead of 1 July to 30 June to align with the PFMA reporting requirements. In terms of another big amendment in the bill is that of monitoring and enforcement. This chapter was called Monitoring and Intervention. As Minister and DG has alluded and discussed in detail the intervention challenges, we are not having very strong enforcement measures in the Water Services Act when we're looking at compared to the National Water Act. So we are including similar powers. So the National Water Act is a specific environmental management act under the National Environmental Management Act. So it allows for our environmental inspectors or scorpions. But we cannot just translate that to the Water Services Act because it's not a specific act. So there is a very big amendment in terms of bringing those powers across for DWS to be able to do appropriate compliance and enforcement activities. So that we don't have to go into intervention naturally, but that we can first try and get corrective action through compliance and enforcement internally. Okay, so Section 62 therefore then includes administrative enforcement procedures similar to the National Water Act, the issuing of a pre-compliance notice that gives a transgressor the opportunity to provide representation. Failing that, we move to a directive or a notice in this case, and failure to adhere to a notice then also an offence under the amendment bill. Section 80A to D introduces an authorised person to deal with inspections and investigations. Where they are environmental management inspectors and they've completed the basic training through partnership with Environmental Affairs, they are designated by our minister as EMIs. If they are environmental management inspectors grade 2s, they are also peace officers under the Criminal Procedure Act, which means they can conduct criminal investigations, carry the dockets, and interact directly with the NPA and SAPS. So these are critical powers for us to have under the Water Services Act to bring it on par with the National Water Act. Offences and penalties. Again, the Water Services Act did not specify any amounts in terms of offences. We have amended Section 82 to make it a failure to comply with any obligation, instruction, or directive, which then also includes the standards under Section 9 and 10. After being directed to do so, you have an additional offence. There's provisions that stipulate for 1 million, and then there's provisions that stipulate for 10 million, but the maximum fine is 10 million fine and exceeding, imprisonment of 10 years. Importantly, Section 82A also brings alignment with the National Environmental Management Act and the National Water Act, with bringing in personal liability of a director of a business entity and or a municipal manager. This is not de facto, or it's not without due process that you will be able to find a director or a municipal manager liable, but there has to be also intent proven. In terms of the concluding remarks, DG, I don't know if you want to go through this.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we thought it would also be useful to say what the amendment bill is not about. Based on when we did the public consultations, there were some misperceptions about what it was about, and that included that it was an unconstitutional grab. It was an attempt by national government to take away powers from municipalities. But I think our presentation has made it very clear that we appreciate what the Constitution says, that this is an original local government function over which they have executive authority. And you can see from the presentation that the amendment bill respects that. But at the same time, it also respects the other parts of the Constitution, which says that national government has an obligation to ensure that municipalities exercise that function in a way which results in decent services being provided to people. So the measures that we the measure of the operating license is a mechanism which respects both of those parts of the Constitution. In addition, there have been some misperceptions that this is about privatization. I think based on the idea that it's creating a more enabling environment for alternative WSPs to be appointed, including if a WSA decides, like Ilembe and Imbombela have done, to appoint private companies on concessions. But this is not about privatization. It's about strengthening the role of WSAs and the WSA function, and providing for municipalities to implement the Water Services Act properly as it was originally intended. And then there's also been misperceptions that we're going to introduce a huge new layer of bureaucracy, that the operating license system is going to be a huge bureaucratic and administrative burden on municipalities. And I think we've emphasized in our presentation that it won't be like that at all. It will be kept as simple as possible and straightforward as possible. And we will deliberately minimize the information production requirements, the new information production and any new reporting requirements by municipalities, and possibly, hopefully, have no new reporting requirements and just use existing information that they provide for the operating license assessment. Next, please. And then this slide just shows the summary of the implementation process, which the members will be familiar with. I don't need to go through this, that we have to go through all these steps. We're now at the step of presenting for the first time the bill to Parliament, but there's a long way to go before it becomes an act. And then there'll also be a process to go through before the regulations are issued for the operating license system. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Minister, would you like to add before we go to members of Parliament?
No, Chair, I'm sufficiently covered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very much comprehensive report and presentation. Thank you, Minister and DG and your team for presenting this to us. I'm very happy with the report and the amendments, but as we all know, it is each member has got the opportunity now to ask questions, whether they would like some clarity or whatever needed. Honorable Matutu, you first.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, all. Good morning, all officials and colleagues. Chairperson, my question is simple. I want to know if I can dig my dam so that I can supply my community in Mkanduli Ward 21 under OR Tambo, because there is no water there. Now it seems if I diveka kuhla here clear, you can own your dam as long as uzoba nayo license. So nami ndinganayo na i-opportunity yokuthi xa ndingabe nalam idami ngakwazi u-assist omasipala aba ba-corrupt, especially i-OR Tambo and others.
Yeah, colleague, you heard you must be a water service authority, but I leave that for the minister.
Oh, then I am a water board. Minister.
Through you, Chair, thank you very much. I will mix the language so that I can be clear to Minister Matutu, Minister Matutu, to Mr. Matutu. Thank you very much. The question is...
I'm receiving the ministry.
You are
Colleague,
receiving?
give the minister now the opportunity, please. You had your chance.
Thank you very much. The question is, can I dig my own dam and provide people of Mkanduli with water, because the current water service authority, which is OR Tambo, is failing our people. They don't provide or supply water. The response is, to be a water service authority, you must be a municipality. But if you want to be a water service provider, you must register accordingly, because you have to be compliant, because the fear is that we don't know how are you going to purify that water, that the water that you want to provide to communities, it must go through certain tests. So you don't wake up in the morning and decide that now today I want to dig my dam and just provide water. There are certain processes that we have to follow. Kubalulekile ke Madiba into yoba njengoba i-OR Tambo iyiyo i-water service authority kula region okanye kula district, kodwa njengoba usitsho into yoba abakwazi ukunikezela amanzi ngokoneleyo ingakumbi eMkanduli, ingaba ndinovuka ndenze idamu lam ndibanike abantu amanzi? Hayi, kufuneka ube ubhalisiwe une-license ethi ngoku wena uyi-service provider. Ndiyakwazi wawunazo ii-trucks zamanzi, andikwazi wawathatha phi la manzi. Ubhalisiwe ngokusemthethweni uba unikezela amanzi, kwaye loo manzi awazi uba nabungozi. La manzi ahambe enziwa zonke izinto zokubulala izinto ezifumaneka phaya emanzini, kodwa awuvuki nje uzenzele, ungalandela ii-processes ezifanelekileyo. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member, are you satisfied with the response?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you very much. The second one I had, but I see it has changed. Colleagues, I have written it down now. I will don't see what has changed. The Honourable Moore.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Minister and DG and the team. I'd like to start by saying I think this is a very much needed amendment, and I really like a lot of what I see, but this is also going to be probably the most important piece of legislative work that we engage in this term. An absolutely critical piece of legislation that is aimed at righting a struggling sector primarily driven by municipal failure. And that means it deserves the scrutiny that goes with such a important document. And that means, Chairperson, I don't just have 3 questions, I have many questions. So within the leeway, I'll start with my 3. But then I'll use up as much time as we have, and if we need more, I would appreciate from the DG, from the department, where we can engage further, because there's a lot of technical responses that are going to be needed around some of this. My first three questions are around capacity, Chair. The first one is, obviously, a lot of this relies on licensing for water services providers, but the majority of our water services providers are failing in their provision of the service. And at a broad level, I'd like to ask, what happens if most of the water services providers, the current ones, don't qualify for a license under the new bill? I understand there's some time where they're allowed to operate for 12 months or something, but if over 100 of these things fail to secure licenses because they don't meet the minimum standards, what's going to happen? And I don't think that it's unreasonable to ask in terms of this, because there aren't a plethora of additional entities able to suddenly step in and take over the service. I know we're testing a couple of issues, but I'm concerned around that. I'm also concerned around the department's ability or its capacity to license all of the water services providers. We have just fought our way back a couple of years ago from a backlog of water use applications, and now we're going to need to handle the licensing of these water services providers, which I think will probably be a more onerous licensing requirement than the water use licenses. So are we going to overburden this department? And Chair, I mean, I've got a bunch more capacity questions, but since I'm limited to three, I think it takes it very critically to the minister's very first comments, where she said the reality is, whilst there is provisions for the department to need to intervene, there is not budget to do so. And is there an indication from the department at this stage that there is going to be a significant increase in budget from National Treasury to allow the department to cope with what is a massive increase in scope of its requirements in terms of need for capacity in a variety of ways, including interventions? Is there any engagement that's happened already with National Treasury that indicates that there's going to be sufficient funding to allow for this? And I'll stop there, Chair. I'll wait for the next round for the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Thank you very much, Honourable Moore. You're correct, Honourable Moore, that this amendment need engagement. It is quite a critical amendment, but also it relies on a very strong, effective and efficient local government. Hence, I said the sooner we focus more on local government as well as their technical teams, because at the end of the day, it has to be monitored at that level. Because if it is them who appoint water service providers, if they don't appoint correct people, they appoint the likes of Honourable Matutu, then we can be in trouble whilst we're trying to make things easier. Currently, there is no indication that we are going to get any massive additional budget. We work within the budget that we have. Hence, even if there are things that we so wish to take over and to do, we are unable to do so, and that is also determined by the fiscus in the country. So instead of getting more, we'll be getting less and less. But let me allow DM Mahlobo, DM Sitlulo, and DG and team to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
I suggest Minister Chair will come after DG. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister and DM. On the first question is, I did indicate in the presentation that the operating license system will be designed so that there will be different categories and classes of license, one of which will be an interim license, which will be provided to all the existing water service providers. And that we didn't say that interim license will have a 12-month period. We can decide when we develop the operating license system how long the interim licenses can last for. But I think it will be best to design the system so that the interim licenses can last for as long as is required at the discretion of the department and the minister for the system to operate properly. So we will, when we put in place the operating license system, we will need to manage it carefully and judiciously to avoid the unintended consequences that Honourable Moore is talking about. So we don't want to result in a situation where there's widespread illegality in the country with water service providers operating without a license. We would want to only get into the situation where a water service provider doesn't have a license and would be required to appoint an alternative water service provider as a last resort, where a water service provider is clearly showing no effort whatsoever to improve to meet the minimum requirements of the license. And Honourable Moore, you're quite correct. We can't require water services authorities to appoint alternative WSPs, licensed WSPs, if they don't exist. That's why this process is not going to take place overnight. We need to run two processes in parallel. On the one hand, we need to work with water services authorities and water services providers to support them to improve to meet the minimum requirements to get a license. On the other hand, we need to work more generally with society, including the private sector and the water boards and others, to encourage them to apply to be water service providers, licensed water service providers, so that we can build up a database of alternative water service providers. And we will only be able to request the minister to require a water services authority to appoint an alternative WSP which is licensed as and when sufficient alternative WSPs become available. So this is going to be a process which is going to unfold over time. On Honourable Moore's second question, Honourable Moore, you heard that the principles that we put forward for the operating license system is that it should be as simple as possible. In other words, we're going to deliberately not be comprehensive, because remember, it's not a performance management system for the WSPs. The performance management of the WSPs must be done by the WSA in terms of the Section 19 agreement. And by the way, we are also working on developing improved standard Section 19 agreements to assist WSAs to properly performance manage their WSPs. Those Section 19 agreements between the WSA and WSPs must be much more comprehensive and cover a much more wider range of areas than the operating license will cover. The operating license will be simple and kept to a minimum, will not be comprehensive. Just like a driving license, when you go for a driving license, it's not comprehensive. They could conceivably test many other things apart from whether you have a basic level of vision and whether you have a knowledge of the traffic signs to determine whether you can be a capable driver on the road. But they don't do that, and because the monitoring of people driving on the road is not the responsibility of the driving license section. It's the responsibility of the traffic department in general and the traffic police. So just by issuing an operating license doesn't mean we're then taking responsibility for performance management of the WSPs. That remains with the WSA. Now, we also said that in order to keep the licensing system as possible, we're going to rely on as much existing data as possible. As you know, Honourable Member, the blue, green and no drop assessments are extremely comprehensive and provide us with a huge wealth of information around the performance of WSPs. There's no need for us to duplicate that or to repeat that. And we are managing to do those assessments with our current capacity and our current budgets, and to produce the reports and to do the necessary analysis. And then there's also, we have very good links with Treasury and COGTA. We can get information from them that is legally required by municipalities to send to COGTA and National Treasury. So we can source all of this information without requiring any new additional reporting from municipalities, and without developing any new capacity on our own, and using information technology, we can put in place a system which can bring together all this information and can assess it all for every WSP and can produce results against defined criteria for what are the minimum scores for various things in order to meet the requirements for different classes of licenses. So that's our intention, and that doesn't require a huge amount of money, and nor does it require a huge amount of staff. It's relatively straightforward to put that in place. So if you accept our position that the operating license must be, it must just be a mechanism for ensuring that a WSP has a minimum level of capability. It's not comprehensive. It's not a performance management system. Then it doesn't need to have a huge amount of staff, like Honourable Moore is saying, and it's not going to require a huge amount of budget. We can very easily do it within. We might have to hire a few more people to manage it, but not large numbers, and we won't require a large increase in budget. Thank you, Chair. I'm here to, okay, just to say to the Portfolio Committee members, we also have Karen van der Merwe with us. She can assist with answering questions. She's an expert on water law. She's been involved in developing the legislation for many years in South Africa, and she's a member of our Regulator Commission. So I might later on in the meeting also ask her to assist. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honourable Moore.
Chair, I don't want to segue into my other questions. I was very happy with most of the answers. I just, the DG limited himself to specifically the additional costs around licensing and, you know, for comprehensiveness, because I'm going to be asking about enforcement. I'm going to be asking about interventions. I understand that licensing may not require a major increase in budget. In general, there are a lot of additional responsibilities that are in this bill. So could he please respond in general to any requirements to additional budgeting, or is the statement that actually there won't be, the existing budget will be sufficient to run all of the additional requirements, not just limited to licensing? Thank you.
Annette?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of compliance and enforcement, we have separated the duties between the catchment management agencies to look at the National Water Act, and then our regions to remain with the Water Services Act. So we have existing capability and capacity to deal with compliance and enforcement. Previously, what we've done, if there was a non-compliance to the Water Services Act, we were limited to issuing a non-compliance letter, but it didn't have the kick that a directive necessarily would have. So that is what we're trying to cure with the amendment bill. We have existing compliance and enforcement capacity. We have existing training programs for our environmental management inspectors within our regions and within our head office. We have systems that support them as well. So that capacity is already in existence in the department. It is just to strengthen the tools that we have available to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable Moore, are you satisfied with that response?
Chair, not fully, but let other people go and I'll come in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable Ramaila.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the Minister and Deputies, my colleagues, honourable members on the platform, and officials as led by the DG. Chair, I fully support the proposed amendment as presented by the DG. And now I then want to go to the issue of boards. And I'm speaking under correction. But in as far as legislation is concerned, boards are established under Water Services Authority Act of 1997. But also the PFMA plays a role, as well as National Water Act of 1998. and it gives the minister the responsibility over governance and oversight, but as well as the establishment of the appointment of board members to the minister. But the primary act that is used to establish water boards is Water Services Authority. Now, that be the case, it basically means the primary role of water boards, as it is the case, would be to support the water service authorities playing a role of water service provider. And what used to happen previously is that you would then have water service authorities represented in the boards on a non-remunerative basis, because these boards are basically there to serve water service authorities. But the arrangement as it stands now, in as far as the establishment of water boards are concerned, the same water service authorities that through the Water Service Act empowers the establishment of water boards are then excluded. And now, in as far as this matter is concerned, the Minister of DG, what is the possibility of involving water services authorities in the establishment of having a representation in the water boards? Mainly, I'm saying they are established based or in terms of Water Services Act. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Very much, Honorable Chair. Thank you very much, Honorable Ramaila. Whilst DG is going to give further details on this, I think what we are trying to say here was that the Water Service Authority may appoint the water board to be their implementing agent. Some municipalities, noting that they don't have quality water service providers, they do appoint water boards. Water boards have capacity to be implementing agents, but we don't enforce them to municipalities. Municipalities decide to do so. For instance, in areas where we have funded the projects, and the projects are not complete because of change of conductors and all that, we now change Schedule 5B of such to be Schedule 6B, and we appoint water boards to be our implementing agent, because that is our money that is allocated to such projects. But municipalities have a right as well, if they so feel, to appoint the water boards. But let me allow DG and the team to finish off. Thank you.
Can I come first, Minister?
All right, DM. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Minister, Chairperson, and members. Honorable Ramaile, this piece of amendment has no intention to change the primary responsibility of water boards. Remember, the law is very clear what is their primary responsibility around bulk water treatment and supply. They will remain to do that. But as we undertake the reforms, we don't want to have a situation, Chairperson, where municipalities, if they wanted to appoint another municipality or any other entity, we limit them. For the secondary function that must be done by a water services provider, in the main, water boards will be available to do that job, but they too must be properly regulated in terms of capability. That's why they too, they will need to be licensed so that at least the minimum capabilities are there in place. On the matters of governance, it can be a suggestion, Honorable Ramaile, to the Minister, because ultimately she remains the shareholder. that it will be advisable going forward that in the board there should be a representation, even a slot, a representation either of SALCA or a municipality, or whether of a provincial government, depending on the area of jurisdiction. We know that when minister appoints the panel, a selection committee, an interviewing committee, to make the recommendations to her for consideration of board members, always that committee has a representation of the provincial government, whereas normally the premier where that particular water board operates. And it has always been consistent in every water board that the premier will assign someone. Either they will assign a COGTA, but there is always a representativity there around. But probably if there's a strong view of strengthening intergovernmental relation and cooperative governance, there can be a suggestion to Minister Majodina to say she can consider that. But even if we do that, the boards must still also have certain specific skills. Therefore, if it is an idea, let's discuss it in terms of doing that particular work. But there is no confusion around the law of the question of Section 19 and Section 20 of the Water Services Act on how it is amplified much better, including the role that the bulk water utilities like water boards needs to do. I thank you, Chairperson and Minister.
Thank you, DG.
I'm largely covered by the Deputy Minister, but maybe just to add is that some of our water boards do have representatives of their client municipalities as board members. I don't know, Toko, if you would like to add? Seems like she's having difficulty. Thanks, Chairperson.
Yes, DG.
Okay, go ahead, Toko.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Chairperson and members, honorable members. Yes, the minister still has a prerogative in terms of the appointment of the boards. Once the board has been selected, vetted, the minister looks at the balance in terms of the equity and the representativity. So she still has
We've lost you. I think you just want to confirm what the DG has said. Honorable Ramaila, I think you got the gist of the response on that. Are you satisfied?
Thank you, Chair. I think I have gone through the amendments, and I'm aware the amendment doesn't talk about changing any powers of the board. The point that I was saying is that in terms of constituting of the boards themselves, appointing members of water boards, because the premises upon which they are established, the Act, when it comes to legislation, is the Water Services Act. It's not the Water Act. Yes, the Water Act comes in later. Now, and I hear the DG saying some of the boards have representatives from water services authorities. I'm looking at a standard approach where we say, and this for me is to really deal with the relationship between water service authorities and the water boards, because from the water service authorities, there's no ownership of the boards. They see boards as an entity that belongs to the department only, whilst this is an entity that is established basically to provide services as WSPs. Now, I'm saying, and I've heard what the Deputy Minister Masawa has said. Maybe that is something that the minister might want to look at going forward in standardizing this, either through organized local government whatsoever. But I have a very view that WSAs must have a representative in the water boards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, before we go to the next member, I've been informed that Honorable Makahola has been replaced by Honorable Diale of the EFF. The member was on the platform and has fallen off. I just want to make sure whether the member is back on. We would just like to welcome her, but I really don't see her on the platform. So there is a new member from the EFF that has joined the committee in the place of Honorable Makahola. Colleagues, can we then go to Honorable Kegakilwe?
Chairperson, thank you very much. And good morning, Minister, and two Deputy Ministers, Director General and the team, and good morning, honorable members. Chairperson, I fully support the amendments as presented, and let me welcome the opening remarks of the Minister, as well as the presentation by the department. Chairperson, I'm happy about how the department went on drafting the bill. They did an excellent work, especially with regard to the constitutional requirements. They provided a clear and a correct interpretation of the constitutional requirements for this bill. Chairperson, the clarification given by the department in the bill, especially with regard to the functions of the Water Service Authority and water service providers, the separation of powers will really assist. This is very important, Chair, to address our country's current water and sanitation situation. The compulsory national standards, we really need that. They will address most of our challenges. And Chairperson, I'm happy that non-compliance with those standards will be deemed as an offense. And again, Chairperson, when it comes to the issuing of the license, I think the minister is better suited to be the one approving the licensing of water and sanitation authorities and providers. Chairperson, the interpersonal relationship indicated in the presentation, I am happy about it. The department has done an excellent job when it comes to that. Chair, I only have one question with regard to the water authorities. The presentation indicated that most of the water authorities are district municipalities. Unfortunately, that is not the case in Northwest. I'll just give an example of Dr. KK District Municipality, which is not a water service authority. And all the local municipalities in that district, they are really failing to provide the water and sanitation services to the community. So my question with regard to this, how is the department going to assist that the Dr. KK is included? Because in most of the instances where there are challenges in those local municipalities, the district will go and assist. That was my only question, Chair. And then I've got last recommendation. My recommendation to the department is in slide 26, section 35A to J, improving water board governance. The second bullet, it talks to the composition of appointment of the board aligned with the King's report. Chairperson, we have different King reports, and then I propose that the latest one was released on the 31st of October 2023, which is King's 5. But I will then recommend that instead of just writing that the appointment will be based on the King's report. The department should indicate that the latest King's report, the appointment will be aligned to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Thank you very much, Honorable Khakilwe. Let me start with the last recommendation. We take that recommendation, Honorable Khakilwe, that let's be specific and quote the latest King's report. Thank you very much. In terms of the Water Service Authority to be included, where it's not able to play its role. Identification of water service authorities and water service providers, it's done by COGTA. The recommendation, I think, is that we must as well sensitize COGTA, because in some of the engagements that we have with COGTA, they agreed with us that whatever they looked at in allowing those municipalities to be both water service authorities as well as both water service providers, there was something wrong, or something has changed drastically compared to the era in which they allowed them to do so. So we'll also engage COGTA on this, because when you talk local government, you also talk COGTA, but we take that recommendation very serious, that we must also engage with COGTA. Thank you very much.
DG, would you like to add to that?
I don't know if DM would like to come in. DM?
No, you know what, Chairperson and Minister, the issue that Honorable Khakilwe she's saying, the issues whether a district, whether a local municipality becomes a water services authority, is not in the purview of the minister. Because I know, for an example, the same example of Northwest, in Mpumalanga, all the local municipalities are water services authorities, then the districts are not. And then when you come to Limpopo, in Limpopo, the two districts are water services authorities, but the other one is not having the same powers. And I've always believed that now that the president is leading this issue of reforms and our minister and the means of COGTA, we must also keep an eye on the question of what do we call it, the review for local government in terms of the white paper. But at the very same time, like Minister, she has dealt with one of the biggest issues of the functionality of water services authorities, around 144, of which 105. It's an issue that we need to be able to deal with, but it should never be sometimes thinking that legislating it will always resolve it. But on our attitude as a Ministry of Water and Sanitation, the reform to say the Water Services Authority function must be clearly defined, police and oversight, and the water services provider function. In the main, it addresses the issue of capability. Can you do the job? Can you discharge this responsibility of ensuring that people do have access to water and sanitation? Can you also address the issues of reliability? Maybe it's not always Chairperson structural, but it's always more about issues of performance. But in the department, there are discussion. The minister has not made a final determination. One of the biggest things we do, because there's a DDM model now, what will be the role of the districts? Especially some districts, they do have capacity. Some of them, they don't have capacity. And they can't even raise revenue and taxes. But some of the assets, just to keep them busy, where infrastructure strangles between two localities. Sometimes those districts, if they do have capacity, they can do some of the work. But as we say, the idea of an implementation model, whether you use another municipality, whether it's local, whether it is district, you use an entity in terms of concession, whether you use a private company and others, it is what defined in the original 1997 Water Services Act, it still remain relevant, whatever model you choose. But ultimately, ensure that there is a license to do the work, and then there's a capability. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kilwe.
Chairperson, thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you, Minister, for the response and the clarification from DM. But I still maintain that our local municipalities in Dr. KK, they do not have that capacity, and I hope the department will assist us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Ditebe.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning to you, to the honorable members, to the Minister and the deputies, the DG, and his entire team. Chairperson, let me start off by also welcoming the amendment bill. As we know, this is a bill, as the Minister has said, not a new one that is, but one that seeks to amend the existing principal legislation so that in the aftermath of 1997, we can bring it in sync with all that has happened based on our experience, research, etc., to try and ensure that this very important resource called water is available reliably and in a good quality state to our people as per the prescripts of our Constitution. So I'd like to know, Chairperson, having expressed support on behalf of the ANC for this amendment, and indeed the DG and the Minister have done very well in outlining the framework within which this particular amendment is sought. And I'd like to know, Chairperson, to the extent that the Constitution protects original powers of municipalities as explained by the DG in terms of Section 156, and there are other sections of the Constitution, and there, I say, other pieces of legislation, namely MFMA, etc., which reinforce that particular section of the Constitution. And my question should be understood in the following manner, namely that the department, DWS, that is the Minister, and given perhaps the portfolio committee cannot set about to subvert or vitiate the Constitution or set it aside, even though, of course, recognition exists on our part that while the drafters of our Constitution may have been very well intentioned in hiding off those original powers of municipalities, capacity has been lagging, as honorable members have indeed stated, and I think we have seen that not only with the amendment of the white paper on local government, which has been in existence since 1998, but I think recognition existing within intent of this particular proposed amendment to the principal legislation. Now, my question is whether, for example, our department, DWS, and sister departments like Proctor and Monitoring and Evaluation, DPME, can act in concert to ensure that the letter and spirit of the Constitution, while it may not be violated with specific reference to 156, can we not at an operational level, and I'm speaking in particular to the invocation of Section 163 of the Water Services Act to support municipalities, can we not ensure that while indeed the original powers of municipalities exist, we do not have an unintended consequence at an operational level? And we have seen this 105 out of 144 municipalities, where, if you like, there seems to be this stonewalling on the part of some municipalities to be in sync with what the Constitution provides for, and going to Chapter 3, that being protection of the well-being of citizens of the Republic. In other words, can we ensure that while the Constitution lays down the law, so to speak, or the framework, that the municipalities do not come across as two persons, for example, who agree to break the law and call it a valid contract. So in other words, the municipalities cannot hide behind original powers, just theoretically outside of context, because then they don't want to be held liable. So I'm talking about the operational level, as it has been the case with Section 63, for example, that yes, municipalities cannot, the department cannot take over functions of municipalities. But can we ensure that there is a balance between our understanding of that provision of the Constitution and other provisions of the Constitution, the relevant pieces of the relevant legislation, and the protection of the well-being of our citizens? Because many people hold the view that even though we are not responsible, but they expect us to ensure that there is water flowing in the taps reliably and water of good quality. So that's really where I am, Chairperson. I, as I said, broadly understand where the department comes from. Lastly, Chair, if you look, for example, at Section 6.3, in terms of the Services Act, Water Services Act, which currently is at play in quite a number of municipalities. I've started before my own municipality. It's huge amounts of money, hundreds of millions, billions of rand that are used to ensure that infrastructure is either refurbished or built from scratch. But then the municipality, the department cannot simply walk away. Yes, it is understandable that it cannot appoint processors, etc., for municipalities. But what is it, either by law or at an operational level, is it that the department can ensure that this investment does not go to waste? Because we are in the aftermath of conclusion of the conclusion of a number of such projects, facing the risk that the municipality may very well not appoint appropriately skilled personnel to run those plans. Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, members, Honorable Dithebe. There was an echo as you were speaking, but I didn't want to disturb you. Maybe for future, don't use your headphones when you are in such meetings. Every time we lose you, we stretch our ears. But the gist I think I heard, it's a very, Honorable Dithebe, it's a very dicey situation in that we have to make reference to the Constitution because the issue of water, which is part of the human right, which is something that cannot be, is supposed to be non-negotiable when it comes to its services, but it is located within a sphere of government. What you are saying is very true. All of us, we do know that most of our municipalities, they don't have this capacity to carry through what is their mandate. There are various factors which lead to that. Your earlier contribution, Honorable Dithebe, that maybe we should seize the moment on the white paper to check what is the section that talks about water and sanitation. How is it crafted? Are there still loopholes where we can maybe put our suggestion on that? When Parliament started constitutional review this year, which is the 29 years of the Constitution. I was happy to see that, and I thought maybe there will be a chapter on water and municipality mandate that might also necessitate that review. Most countries, they review. Yes, Constitution is a highest document in each and every land, but that is why the legislation allows it to be amended, and you amend because you have seen some gaps. But I think now that bus has left the station already. Maybe what we have to look at is to piggyback also on that white paper and see what can be done. But if you look at number of municipalities, they don't even deserve to be called municipalities, to be honest. Where I'm deployed in the constituency, it used to be Alwa North municipality. There was Bakerstop municipality. There was Venterstad municipality. But now it's one municipality called Walter Sisulu municipality. It has brought together all small dorpies. It's like bringing 5 graves together, and you think that you can have life out of that. So there's no life in that municipality. They don't have anything. They can't do anything, but it's called municipality. Maybe the country must also review these 257 municipalities. They are rather too many, but also they are unable to do what is expected of them. So that might be a debate for another day. Thank you very much, Chair. DG will add. Thank you.
DG?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add briefly to say that I agree completely with Honourable Ditebi, and that's precisely why we're introducing these amendments. All the different parts of the Constitution need to be read together. So while the Constitution says that this is an original function of municipalities, it also says that national government must ensure that citizens get a decent service. But with the powers that we have in terms of the current Water Services Act and the mechanisms at our disposal in terms of the current Water Services Act, we are limited in the degree to which we can achieve that. So the amendments that we're putting in place are precisely to give us more ability to do what Honourable Ditebi is saying should be done. So if we go to the example of our existing Section 63 interventions and the fact that we're giving hundreds of millions of rand to municipalities to rehabilitate infrastructure or build new infrastructure, but if then the water service providers don't perform and they don't maintain properly, and there isn't ring fencing, and the revenues from the sale of water keep being used for other functions, and then the service quickly deteriorates. The whole point of introducing these amendments is to create a situation where that doesn't happen, to create a situation where we can be sure that when we invest this money, there'll be water service providers which will have the necessary capability, and a situation where it's recognized that those water service providers should have full authority over the full function as a ring-fence function. So the short answer is that the amendments are aimed at achieving what Honourable Ditebi is saying should happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honourable Ditebi.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thanks to the Minister. I wasn't aware of that feedback in the background earlier. May I just say that perhaps for purposes of emphasis, so far the department, since this particular piece of legislation existed back in 1997, and now with the contemplated amendment, and with 2019 having commenced the introduction of the one plan in terms of the district development model, just for purposes of emphasis, and I know that as Deputy Minister has said before, the Minister, the department intends to assume a whole of government approach. Perhaps it is opposite to stress the fact that our department, because it always is the one that's on the receiving end of flack from the public, and dare I say that it's people oftentimes that may not quite understand the delineation of roles, should therefore take the lead, hold hands with the sister departments like COGTA, DPME, etc., to ensure that perhaps in retrospect, even the very district development model, in anticipation of the implementation of the specific provisions of this particular amendment bill, that this is followed to the letter, because we have, as you know, Chair, champions at a technical level and at a political level in respect of the DDM. And I think that mindful, of course, of what I said earlier and what so eloquently the Minister, Deputy Minister, and the DG have articulated, the limitations that are placed on us by provisions of the Constitution in terms of the powers of municipalities, local government. We would really like to see that happen, because it really is very frustrating, because we invest, as we have said, huge amounts of money in support of municipalities, but we're not able to carry this thing to its logical conclusion to ensure that the quality of life and well-being of the citizen is ultimately guaranteed, impacted positively, Chair, and that we can look at the outcomes and say, this is what was intended in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I give to Honourable Moore, DG, can you just have a look in the chat? Honourable Reddy has some questions there. Whether you can have a look at that as well so that we can respond to those. Honourable Moore.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for, again, all the responses. Again, because I'm asking a lot of pointed questions, I want to reiterate to everyone on the call that we support the idea of the initiative here in general. There are specifics that we need to understand and concerns. And again, I am concerned that however much we say this isn't going to cost more money, but when you're talking about all of the additions, it doesn't seem likely. One of the things I want to raise a concern around quickly is we spoke about constitutionality of this arrangement. I have a concern, and there was some of an answer, Chair, so I'm not going to ask my full question, but has there been engagement with entities like SALGA and COGTA with regards to this issue? Because obviously, with regards to the constitutionality, if they choose to fight this particular attempt to centralize certain provisions, I understand where we're coming from, but have we engaged with them to see whether they support the intentions here? Because obviously it is a shifting of powers towards DWS away from COGTA. And is the department prepared around a constitutional challenge with regards to this? The second thing I want to talk about is with regards to, my right set of notes here, the capacity of municipalities to cope with the additional burden that this puts on them. So it's all good and well to say, we'll give them time, but a lot of municipalities are struggling under the limited requirements that exist. And for instance, now that we're trying to force them to do the WSA and WSP correctly, the functions correctly, if they're already struggling, is there an intention or somewhere intended to support them on this issue? And I think I understand it's easy to say that this is a thing, but again, we're talking about over 100 municipalities that are probably going to require support in some form or another in order to properly functionalize their WSAs and WSP functions, with the intention to split how they manage those. And finally, I just want to get some understanding around the intervention powers. Particularly, my concern is that they used, that they could be used improperly. How do we know what is a genuine case of that requires intervention? And what protections are in place for municipalities to challenge such interventions should they be initiated, administrative justice or whatever the case is going to be. At the moment, we talk about failure to meet obligations. It's a very broad definition, and I'm concerned around the potential for over intervention, unreasonable intervention. I can go into this more, but I think I've asked the basic question. I'll wait for the response to see whether I need to ask more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Thank you once more, Honourable Mom. I will take the last question on the intervention process. The intervention process gets initiated by the provincial government. At times, it gets initiated by ordinary citizens who are not satisfied with the services that they get from municipalities. But once that has been submitted through a minute from the provincial cabinet, it gets sent to the NCOP. The NCOP, through its select committee, will go out on a mission to check the validity of such. And once they get that report, they come back, they go to the municipality with their findings, then they come back to the National Council of Provinces to debate the matter, and all 9 provinces will have to concur on what must be done together with COGTA. So there is a tool or a mechanism of trying to validate the authenticity of an intervention. But let me on the capacity of municipality. Not all municipalities have capacity. That is why out of 144, we are mentioning 105 that are found to be wanting. What needs to be done? Are we going to capacitate these municipalities? Not necessarily, because that then becomes there will be over exceeding our mandate. That is supposed to be COGTA with their tools like the MISA, like the municipal support system that they have in their system. But let me allow DG and other technocrats to come in. Through you, Chair, DM Matlobo is attending another urgent meeting with the stakeholders of this department. I'm sorry that he's not on the platform. DM Sitlulo's network is disservicing him. He is on driving. I'm sorry for that, Chair. Thank you.
It's fine. Thank you, Minister. DG?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. We have engaged extensively with both SALGA and COGTA regarding the amendments in the bill. And we also had to take the amendment bill through the clusters together with where COGTA was represented, and it also had to go through the cabinet committees and cabinet with the Minister of COGTA. And the Minister of COGTA also supported as part of Cabinet that the bill be submitted to Parliament. In our engagement with SALGA, initially there were some misunderstandings about the intention of the bill, that it might be some kind of constitutional function grab. But after quite extensive engagement with SALGA, they developed a better understanding of what it is exactly that we're going to do, and that we're not taking the function away from the municipalities, and that it's about strengthening the WSAs. I think I can say that we have a constructive approach, working relationship with SALGA on this, as illustrated by the fact that SALGA is working with us and agreed to work with us jointly, but us and COGTA, to support municipalities to undertake Section 78 processes to consider alternative water service providers. That's not to say, Chairperson, when SALGA appears before the committee, when you call them, they might raise issues regarding the bill. But I've tried to answer that question the best that I can. I think we are as prepared as we can be if there's a constitutional challenge to the bill. We've engaged in extensive legal research on it and consulted legally. We've had extensive discussions with the Chief State Law Advisor regarding the constitutionality of it. And so I think we're as prepared as we can be, and we are confident that the bill is constitutional as it currently stands. With regard to the capacity of municipalities, yes, it's an ongoing issue, and Honourable Reddy has made comments about that in the chat box as well. We do work with other departments on a lot of capacity building efforts, and more should, I agree with Honourable Reddy as well as Honourable Moore, that more will need to be done with capacity development. For example, we need to work with the EW SETA, which is our SETA, the electricity and water SETA. There needs to be a proper labour market survey to determine whether there's any shortages of, for example, qualified process controllers. And when these amendments are introduced and the licensing system is introduced, and that results in water service providers moving towards appointing properly qualified people, the EWCETA needs to prepare for that and a probable increase in demand for properly qualified process controllers and proactively train people in anticipation of that increased demand. Annette, would you like to add?
Thanks, DG. The amendments of the Water Services Act must be understood together with the sector reforms that's also being done by National Treasury, as well as the local government reforms under Operation Vulindlela. To link to the capacity issue, the trading reforms under the metropolitan reforms, there is a significant amount of money that is being pushed into the capability and capacity building of our metropolitan services. We've engaged with LG SETA and EW SETA through partnership with Denmark to bring a skills development program to be linked to building capacity of water services authorities and water services providers to be able to meet the minimum compulsory standards, and also to assist municipalities, the internal mechanism to achieve compliance to criteria that we already have in terms of the drops. And that will be rolled out. The financing has been confirmed with Denmark. An agreement still has to be concluded, but that capacity building program will start with work in next year, and then that training will be rolled out to all municipalities to enable them to meet the minimum standards. Thanks, teacher.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, some good answers. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm just so the minister gave an explanation of a process. I thought that was the existing process in terms of intervention. I thought that the intention behind the bill was to simplify remove the red tape, let's call it that, to allow for easier intervention by the department. Would it be possible, Chair, to request a report, because this is going to be an issue, on how interventions, what the process for intervention would specifically be? And again, it's in the actual bill, amendment bill, but there's some gray areas that need to be defined. And again, I can find the exact wording where it's a bit broad, prescribed minimum score. No, that's a different issue. Anyway, so the gist is there some opportunity to get some more understanding of when interventions can be applied? Or if it is still the process, that same process that needs to go via the provinces, via the NCOP, that's fine. But my understanding was we were making it easier to do in terms of that. And then, Chair, I mean, I don't want to misuse the platform. I do have questions, and I don't mean to delay everyone. Is this the appropriate time, or should I rather try and do a written process to continue?
We've got 14 days still to look at this and have a discussion, and I will request the department to come back to clarify some of those questions before we take a final decision on this bill. We have heard now that the DG also indicated that the committee may take a decision also to have a discussion with SALGA concerning this matter. So it is not as if this is the final process. So I will not deny you if you want to ask. I first would like to find out whether there's any other members that would also want to add any other questions. And then on your last request, can the DG maybe just clarify you on that one that you have asked? DG?
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, we will provide a written response to Honourable Moore on that. But in the interim, the answer is that the interventions remain the same because we're bound by other legislation, the Constitution, to follow the 139 process and to do it together with the Provincial Department of Cooperative Governance. But we'll provide a more comprehensive response to Honourable Moore on that. Chairperson, there's also Honourable Reddy's questions in the chat box. Would you like us to respond to those or comments?
I would appreciate if you could.
I'll appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Honourable Reddy raised several issues related to training or capacity building and phasing and funding. With regard to the phasing, there will be phasing built into the operating license system. As I indicated when I presented on it, there won't be an immediate requirement that all existing water service providers must have immediately overnight have the necessary capability, minimum capability to get a license. There'll be different classes and categories of license, including interim licenses for existing internal service delivery mechanisms in municipalities, so that this process of making sure that all water service providers have the minimum level of capability to get a license is done in a phased way. I think we partly answered the question of capacity building. Honourable Reddy, we agree with you. Capacity building is key. As we make sure that the water services authorities actually create their capacity to play the water services authority function, which they haven't been playing, we will need to have a dedicated support on particularly those roles of a water services authority to the municipalities and support them to put that in place. So on the capacity building, we agree with Honourable Reddy, it's critical. On the issue of funding, Honourable Reddy recommends a conditional O&M support fund. We have over many years engaged with National Treasury on that issue, and National Treasury has been consistent in turning down the idea of using grants to fund operation and maintenance. They did make a concession, a limited concession, in saying that a relatively small percent of the conditional grants, the MIG and the WISIG, can be used for rehabilitation type of maintenance, but not for ongoing day-to-day routine maintenance. So it's not a decision that we can make as DWS. It would have to be a decision that would be made by National Treasury, and National Treasury have a number of reasons. I don't want to attempt to talk on their behalf as to why they've opposed the idea of using grants for operation and maintenance funding in the past. Thank you, Chair. Corin, would you like to add?
Yeah, just probably to respond to two comments around the concept of centralizing control. I think the DG's already explained that this is not intended as a constitutional grab. Licensing is just basically a tool to respond to the department's constitutional obligation to see to the effective performance of municipalities. The point is, where there is effective performance, the National Department has absolutely no power. It's only where there's failure. And I think that's part of our challenge. And it was raised earlier to say municipalities are very strong on what their rights are, but they're not very responsive around their duties. And I think this is an important tool for national government to be able to call municipalities to task where there has been non-performance with their obligations while we still respect their rights. So where there is non-performance, all we can do is say to the municipality, you need to change to respond. And then they must proceed as the authority with their right to ensure service delivery to continue to do so. So I think it's critically important that the concept of centralizing power is properly understood. And then the second point that I really appreciate of Honourable Reddy is the call for the public quarterly dashboard. In other words, publication of performance. And if you global search the document, I think we've used publication 3 or 4 times in the tool. We want it to be the information to be data-based and to be readily available to anybody who wants to look at the performance of the WSP. So I think we have addressed that issue.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honourable Reddy.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies for network. I'm actually driving, so my apologies. Colleagues, Minister, if she's still in the House, Deputy Minister, let me thank the officials, the DG and the team for their response. Excellent response. However, colleagues, I want you to understand the catch-22 situation we find ourselves in today. MIG grants and other grants are used for capital projects. What we're finding happening in municipalities is we have state-of-the-art capital projects, but no operational plan to maintain these facilities. As a result, they become white elephants. So it is important as a department that apart from just approving a grant, whether it is through getting approval from Treasury, that may be one of the options where the grants could also be used for operational expenses. I'm just not suggesting that should be the end of it, but no grant should be approved without a clear plan of how that municipality is going to manage that project. I'll give you an
Honourable Reddy, you're cutting out.
Capital funds used, you have a facility up, but there is no operating costs. There was a plan where there was supposed to be an offtake agreement somewhere with some industry there, and I think that fell away. And as a result, the project is just there collecting dust now for several years. We don't want a country where there are stadiums, there are waste treatment plants, there are all these massive projects that are lying like skeletons, not being used, simply because municipalities are unable to find operating expenses trying to make clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Reddy, you're making a valid point, and we'll have to see how we can deal with that. It's useless having a huge facility, but they don't have enough funds to run that. But I think we will be able to deal with that. Any response to that, Minister?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to Honourable Reddy. That's a valid point. That's a very valid point. Unfortunately, I don't have a concrete response for that, because when Treasury said these are the regulations, we cannot go beyond that. But I think it is worth more engaging on it, because we spend a lot of millions building a project, hand over the project, then the project become a white elephant. I think it is a point to engage with. Thank you.
Thank you. DG, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I think Honourable Reddy is making a very good suggestion, which is something we've started to talk to Treasury about, but we need to do more work on, and that is the possibility of making it a condition of us giving a capital grant to municipality that they provide us with convincing information of their plans to properly operate and maintain the infrastructure before we approve the grant. So it's a very good suggestion, and we will look at that further. Thank you.
DG, isn't it possible that we keep a retainer on such a project, say, for 5 years to make sure that we can assist with the maintenance? Could we also look at that?
I think that will be harder to get past National Treasury, because what they've indicated to us is that if they start using the national grants to fund operation and maintenance, it could open the doors to a floodgate, and it could result in a huge fiscal burden on the country. And it goes against the principle of the water sector being financially self-sustaining. But I do agree with Honourable Reddy that we could be doing more to use our grants for leverage to try and get more municipalities to do their jobs better, including on the operation and maintenance side.
Thank you very much. Honourable Reddy, are you satisfied with the response?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you for the response.
Thank you very much. Honourable Ditebe.
Chairperson, I have a question here, but before I go to my question, it's just for clarity purposes in respect of SALGA. Perhaps the department could then clarify us. Chair, I think what Honourable Reddy is raising is important also in another respect. You know, in other instances, you may not necessarily have adequately qualified personnel, say, to run a wastewater treatment plant, process controllers, etc. But even before a project starts, let me give you a very good example of what I know. You'll find that where the department has intervened in terms of Section 63, okay, to help the municipality bid with the internal reticulation network, pump stations, even wastewater treatment works, you'll find that that very municipality has yet another issue of a huge debt with another utility. In this regard, I'm talking about a utility like Eskom, and I'll give you, as I say, an example. In Machabeng, you have a project that stalled over a long period of time, well over 300 million rand, and I'm talking about a human settlement project, so-called G Hostel, social housing project there. And at the instance of the current Minister of Human Settlement, she decided together with the MECs that they would start first by unblocking blocked projects. And of course, then that particular project, that is the human settlement project, not very far from the wastewater treatment works, then was completed at a cost of an additional 92 million rand. It's going fine. But you see, the problem is the 274 units cannot be electrified because the municipality, apart from the 8.7 to 9 billion rand that it owes Val Central, owes Eskom 7 billion rand. You know what that means? It means that not only is it unable to then electrify those 274 units, it also means that the price tag of 100 million rand is what is required to power up the 12 megaliter wastewater treatment works, which forms part of the 3.5 billion rand that the minister spoke about in her budget speech earlier this year in respect of just that particular municipality. Meaning, therefore, what Honourable Reddy is raising is important, but it is much more complicated and complex in the sense that it's not just a question of a mega project or turnkey project being ready to be to be operated, but you could then have other hinge factors, and that's why earlier, and I know that the DG, the minister, have taken that into account. We do appreciate the recent scorecard, report back or progress report on the Operation Vulindlela version 2. But as I said earlier, also on the issue of the DDM, because the two are complementary. So you can see that we can try and come up with amendments, and I'm not trying to downplay what is intended to be achieved with this amendment. But you can see that more and more we need DDM, we need Operation Vulindlela than we did ever before. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Minister, would you like to comment on that? Not really a question, but a comment made by the Honourable Member.
No, I note what Honourable Member is saying, and I concur with him that it's a little bit complex. But let's engage on the matter further. And the portfolio, Chair, and the portfolio committee chair, when we bring the bill as we have done, it has a right to have its own meeting and make some of the recommendations, maybe that on things that must also go into the amendment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes, Honourable.
Chairperson, sorry, I said I have another question. Sorry, just on the issue of SALGA, if you permit me. Are we going to bring SALGA back here, given the fact that are we going to then have a special session with SALGA in respect of this, given the fact that there are other stakeholders, whether it's our CISA or whatever else? I just want to understand the context in which reference was made to SALGA, not that we shouldn't have any engagement with them, but it might very well mean that we have to engage with every other stakeholder that's affected by the amendment. Chair.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, what I would suggest is we look at the time frame, what we've got as a committee, and then we can take a decision next week on the process going forward, whether we want to bring back the department, whether we want to consult with COCTA as well. So I have requested the DG, maybe the DG has not seen that as yet, that we just get a time frame on this matter, that the committee has to do their work. And then I think we need to scrutinize that further. Furthermore, I would also ask members that in the meantime, if there's any urgent questions that you need to ask the DG or the department or the minister, maybe do that in writing directly to them or via the committee. Maybe it's better, then everybody can see the question you have asked, and so it goes through the committee and we get the response back from the committee to make sure that we are all on the same page. As Honourable Moore has said, and all the other members have said, that we in principle not against this bill, but the amendment, but I think it is important for us to make sure that we don't slip up with this, and then we've got to come back on a later stage to amend this again. So just give us the opportunity to see what is the time frame on this matter, and we can have a discussion then next week concerning whether we want to invite SALGA, COCTA, whoever we want to invite, but we as a committee can have that discussion quickly next week. Is that in order with every member on the committee?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further business? We have decided that we will not deal with point 6 now. We'll deal with it later. Minister, last word from your side?
Chair, I'm covered. We'll hear from the committee if you might need us to come back. The DG will also communicate properly with through the secretary on the time frame. How much time are we given to deal with this amendment? But I thank you very much, Chair, with the engagement. But this engagement make us to think further
to say we can play our role, but also it also need other departments to play their role for us to have an effective governance. I thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and all honourable members. Thank you.
Colleagues, I think that is then the end of the meeting. Honourable Reddy, is that a legacy hand? It seems it is a legacy hand. Colleagues, with that said, then thank you very much for attending this meeting. I now adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.